In this lesson, we will build our stock control application front end. So the React front end for the stock application will then link to the back end application where we have our database and give us back data which we will then use to display. So the first thing we need to do is to create a directory and a structure for our application at the front end. We will use the create React app. And create React app is an officially supported way to create single page applications. And it offers us a modern build setup with no configuration. We simply type a command and it builds the configuration for us. Instead of using Webpack and Babel, we can install React.js by installing create React app, simplifying the work that we have to do. In the terminal window, we will first of all create a project directory. And I'm going to create it on the desktop or somewhere like that. You can create it wherever you want to have your application, your folder. And I will use the terminal window because I'm doing this on a Mac. If you're on a PC, then what you can do, or a Windows machine, what you can do is use your shell or your command line. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our terminal window and then we're going to create our directory from there. So I'm going to do mkdir, and this will create the directory in whatever folder or directory I'm currently in at the moment. And in my case, you can see that I'm on the desktop. So I'm going to make directory, Jerry, front end, and press enter. And now I need to go into that directory. So I will now go CD to change directory to Jerry, front end. And in this case, I will do ls, or you can do dir. And you can see that there's nothing here, but I am in the front end application. And now, because I have the installation for Node and npx, I do npx create -react -app. And then we tell it what app we want to create or what we want to call it. So in our case, it will be front end -app, and we press enter. Now you will need to be patient because this will take some time to install everything that it needs. So you can see it's starting to download all the packages, etc. that it needs, and then it will delete the stuff that it doesn't need and leave us with our application. So now that the installation has complete, we get some messages and we can see that it says npm start will start our development server, and that will start the development server usually on port 3000. And we can do npm run build to build or bundle the application. But for now, we suggest that you begin by typing cd front end app. In other words, we want to go into the application folder that we created. And when we do that, we will see our code. So it's front end app, and press enter. And then I suggest we do npm start. So if I do npm start, this will just simply show us that things are working. Now this will take a bit of time to build the server and open up in our browser. And you can see localhost :3000, and you can see our logo. So if I go back into the terminal, I can do Control-C to stop that server. And if I do ls, We can see the files that have been created and the folders that have been created, and the package JSON is where it has all the details about the dependencies that we need. Now, to get this to run, we will use an editor. So to use an editor like Visual Studio Code, we could from here just do code space dot and press enter, and that would open it up in Visual Studio Code. Or I can just open Visual Studio Code and go to File and Open, or click Open here. And then I have to find it wherever we created it. Well, mine was on the desktop, so I have StockControlFrontEnd, and I click the Open button, and you can see that we have our application. I can close this welcome screen, and when I expand the front end app, we can see that we have node modules, loads and loads of node modules. We can see that we have an SRC folder and a public folder, and the SRC folder is where we will put an awful lot of our material or components as we build them. But let's start off and have a look at the structure first of all. We'll have a look at the important parts, and the important parts are the public index HTML and the source index.js. So they're two very important files. A lot of the other files, for example, report web vitals, for example, we could get rid of, or setup tests we could get rid of. But these two are important. So we can delete the rest, and we can create other subdirectories if we want. So let's have a look first of all at the index HTML. So we're going to amend the index HTML if we need to. So when we open the index HTML, it'll be a normal HTML standard template. So what we'll see is we'll have a header, we have a link to a href, and then we'll have a link again, and it's to a ping, which is the logo we saw. And more importantly, we'll see something in here called div id equals root, and it's at this div that all our components will be displayed. And we'll just simply want to change something like the title, but we need to have this index root. We could change the name of it and then refer to it later on to the new name, but the standard name is just root. So when we look at the index HTML within our code, if I open it up, remember the index.html is in the public folder, and we can see in our code here the things that we saw on the PowerPoint, and we want to just change the title of it to Stock Control Application. And then we just have in here, you need to enable JavaScript to run this app. Again, we can take that out if we want. The root is the important bit. So we're just going to change the title. The next thing then that we want to look at is we will want to look at the index.js file. So the index.js file, we will put into the index.js import React DOM from react-dom/client. So our generator project, really we want React DOM. If we go into the code and have a look at the index.js, we will see that it has import React from React, import React DOM from React DOM client. We can change these things. So in our case, we have import React DOM from React DOM client. Then we want to use routing. So we want to be able to click on a link and it routes us or puts us to a component. And to be able to do that, we can use browser router. So again, just like a library that we can use that does the work for us if we put things incorrectly. We want to import index.css. So there is an index.css file, and we can use that. So if we look in the code, index.css just gives us a body and gives us code and tells us what styling we want with that. So we can leave that in. The next thing, if we look at the important piece here then, is import app from ./app. So we're going to build a component. It's going to be a .js file essentially, and it's going to be called app. Now that is already created for us, but we might want to change what's in there. So we're going to import app. So we import the component into this index.js. And then we see that what actually happens then is that we use the root that we looked at when we had the index.html. And what we're saying is we want to get that element by its ID, which was root, and we want to render anything that we want at that particular part. And in this example, you can see that we've got .render, and we want a browser router. So this idea of routing, like a nav link type idea, we want routing. And inside the browse router, we have the app. And we'll have a look at the app.js in a second. So now we'll open our editor again, and we'll amend the code to be what we see on the PowerPoint. So I will just put the code in. So we can see the code: import React DOM from React DOM client, import the browser router, import the index.css, import the app, which we're now going to look at, and then we use the app to render the app at the root in the HTML. So in the index.html, we had the root. We're now going to put the app there. So what we want to do now is we want to look at the app that we're talking about, this, and we can see that the app is the app.js on the left hand side. So I will open app.js, and when I look at the code, you can see that what we have is a function, and the function is called app, and then we export it as app. So we can do it as a function or as a const. We can use the fat arrow function. But essentially what this is saying is this is what we want to be displayed at the root. So this thing here, which has got a header, etc. But what we want to do is we want to make some changes to that. So what we are going to do is we are going to import the routes and the route from the React-router-DOM, so that we can use the routing. We will then import layout, which is another component that we're going to create, so it'll be called layout.js, and we will export it as layout from /layout. In other words, it's in the same directory. We can move all of this later on. Then we're going to import messages, and messages once again is a component. So it's going to be a messages.js file, and then it's going to export it as messages. And then inside the app, which we've got here, we want to have routes. And inside the routes, we want to have individual route. So we have a route, another route, another route. And the first route is saying that if the path that is in the address bar, the URL, is /, we want the layout component to display. If the path is / messages, then we want the messages component to display. And the third one is the catch-all really, and it says if the path is anything else, then we want to simply put out a a paragraph saying there's nothing here, and then 404. So this is our app, and this app will change as time goes on because we'll want to add on another route and another route and another route within the routes, so it can build up. And when we start off, the / will be the default, so the default will be the layout which we're going to create. So we will go into our code in our app.js, and we will create the new code that we want. So we replace what we have here. Our app.js code now then contains routes and has a route for the /, a route for the / messages, and then a catch all. And we export as default app, same name as the const or the function. So to define routes, we define a single route component for each route in our application, and then put all these route components inside the routes component, which you've just seen. And whenever the URL changes, React Router will look at the routes and then decide which of the components it has to display. So for example, if we go / messages in the address bar at the top, then it goes and it displays the messages component. So now what we need to do is we need to create the layout.js component, which we said was one of our routes. And this is going to be very simple. We're going to create a layout.js file, and we are going to import outlet and navlink for navigation. And the outlet is where the things will be displayed within this component. We're going to import the app.css, which we have already seen, and we're going to import some CSS from Bootstrap, and we have to install the Bootstrap using npm, and we'll come back on that. So our const layout, so we're simply saying that this layout component is going to have a style, and the style says that if it's active, you get bold, if it's inactive, you get normal. And then it returns a container, so that's a Bootstrap container. That's why we have class name, not class, but class name. In React we use class name. And then we have a nav, and the nav will have a style. And then we have a table, and the table is a responsive table. And inside it is the important bit, where we have a nav link which says to / messages. So that's just simply saying here's a link to / messages, and it simply displays the word messages. So when we see messages and we have the navigation, it will go to / messages. So one hyperlink to the messages component, and that's what we will want to create. At the end we have this outlet, and the outlet component is essentially a placeholder component that will render whatever our current page's content is. So we will want the messages component to be here when we click on the link. And once again, what we do is we export default layout, which, as you can see, was the same name as we put for the const or for the function. So the outlet component is essentially a placeholder component that will render whatever our current page content is. And the link component is part of React Router DOM. It renders an anchor tag, like an A, under the hood. So it's similar to what we would have used in HTML. Navlink is also a component of the React Router DOM and allows us to navigate throughout the React application. A navlink is similar to the idea of link, but it has the ability to add additional styling. So let's create the code for the layout. So the layout, we right click on our source, go to new file, and type layout .js and press enter. And then we simply put in our code for that. So our code is, as we saw and explained earlier on, we have a layout and we export it as layout, and we have it created in our components src folder, which later on we can change. So we have all of our code for the first part, which is the layout. And then the next part we'll need was the second thing that we talked about, which was our messages. So we're going to create the messages. So let's look at that first. The messages.js component, again, we keep it very simple. We'll get more complex as we go through. And it's simply going to display a heading, a H2. This is the messages component. So very similar to our layout. And we just have a H2 and we export it as default messages. So messages to match what we have for the const. So we go into our code and we will create in the source, right click, go to new file and type in the name of it, which is messages.js, the JS JavaScript components, and our code, as we said, a H2. So we can see that we have now created our layout and we have now created our messages. So let's now continue, and we want to install React Router DOM. So we haven't installed React Router DOM, even though we've been saying we want to use it, we haven't actually done that yet. So if we go to our terminal, we will type, remember we have to be in the front end app. So if I did ls, you can see that I'm in package.json. Yeah, so this package.json is the file, we're in the right place. We're not in source, we're not in public. And then we type npm node package manager install. And we want to install React Router DOM. And we press enter. Again, it takes a little bit of time, but we can see that we have it installed. So that's installing the React Router DOM. We simply do npm space install space react router DOM. Then what we also want to do is, we've talked about using Bootstrap, but we haven't installed React Bootstrap. So again, from the command line, we will type npm space install and then react bootstrap and then space bootstrap, two things. So we go back to our terminal and we do npm install, and then I want react bootstrap and bootstrap. I'll press enter. Again, it can take a few seconds to do that. And now it's installed. If we were to look into our packages in the node modules, you would be able to see all of these things that we have installed in here. So we can see, as we go down through, we will be able to see React Router DOM. So we can see that that has been installed. The same with the Bootstrap, exactly the same thing. So looking, we can see also our React Bootstrap, React Router DOM, React Bootstrap. The next thing that we want to do is we would like to see our application. So we would like to view the application. And we saw earlier that we just typed npm start from the command line to make sure that we could see it on local host. So when we do that, it will give us the layout, and the layout will have in it the messages. So go back to our terminal and type npm start. And remember, always make sure you're in the right directory. And press enter. We have our development server starting. I can see that I can't see the messages, so there's something wrong with my code. And if I go back into it and look at the index HTML where I put the title, we didn't close, or I didn't close this properly. So stock control application, if I go back now, you see up at the top here it had / title, so I knew I had an error message there. So if I refresh, you now see that the messages appears, and when I click on messages, so this whole part here is layout, and when I click on messages, it says this is the messages component, which is exactly what we wanted. If for some reason you don't close the server and you try to run it again, it'll tell you that it's already running on a port, and do you want to start on port 3001 or 3002 or whatever. But we can change the default port, and the way we change the default port is by using the idea of port equals 8888 or whatever else I want to put as my port number. And that can be changed within the env file. But for now, we don't really need to worry about that. Just anytime you can close out, make sure you close down your server with Control-C, and then we will be able to start it back up again on port 3000, or it will then say, do you want to start it in port 3001, and that is fine for what we want to do. Next, we want to create the about app.js component. So we're going to create the about the app.js file in the source folder. Once again, we're saying that we're creating it in the src folder, but we can at a later stage create separate folders, and we can put the app component or the about app component and other components into those folders. So this is a wee bit more complex than the last one. So what we're doing in this case is we're using React again, but we're going to use the card from the React Bootstrap just to pretty things up a wee bit with a bit of styling. That's all we're really doing. We're then going to have a container, and the container is going to have a card and a card header. And then we're going to have a row, and inside the row we're going to have a H2, and the H2 is going to say stock control application using React and Spring Boot, and then another H2, and then we're going to end the header. Then we're going to have a body, and in the body we're going to have a card title. This is all Bootstrap and styling. Don't worry too much about that. We're more interested in getting the whole React app working, and we can look at the styling at a later stage, and we can use something different from Bootstrap. But this is just to make it look in some way user friendly. Inside the card, again, we have card text. We can see that we have an unordered list and a list of items, and we're simply saying that we're going to use CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. And then we have a card footer, and in the card footer we're going to have an image, and we can see from this that the image is going to be in an images folder, and it's going to be called bookinventory.png. So we can put it in our own book inventory PNG, or any PNG that you really want, and it's going to resize it to 204 by 1200. And then we're going to end our card footer, and we're going to end our card, and this whole component is going to be called about the app, which is exactly the same name as we saw earlier on when we created. So we're going to create the about the app in our source folder again. So we will right click on the source, we will go to new file, and we will call it new file about the app. app.js. And then we key in our code, export default about the app, and it's called about the app. So this is all the code that we saw in the PowerPoint. We can paste the code in or type the code in. Much better again if you type the code in, but this is just text essentially. Remember, go to the file menu and make sure auto save is on so that you're automatically saving all your code. Yeah. Now, once we have that, I'll close these down, we have our components inside the SRC folder. But obviously what we saw is that there were two important files, and one was the app.js. And in the app.js, we have said that we wanted to import the layout from and to import the messages from. But we've also now created another component, so we need to do import the component that we called about the app from, and then double quotes dot / about the app, and then semicolon. So we can use double quotes or single quotes there. And what it's saying now is you haven't actually used that even though you've imported it. And that's fine, we've still a wee bit more to do. So we now need to add another route. Now, if you just copy one of the routes that's already there, it'll make life easier for you. And we need to give this the name that we're going to use to call that. So this is the route. So the route that we want to call is about the app. Doesn't have to be that, it's whatever. This route will bring up the thing called, and we change messages to about the app. And you can now see that this line here is happy because you've actually used it. So every time we add a component, we'll need to put it into the app.js, because the app.js is saying here's the routes that will appear, and when the route is / about the app, it will bring up the component called about the app. But all of my stuff is coming from the layout, so I need to go into the layout, and I want to change what's in the layout as well. So in the layout, we will need to change what's in the nav link. Copy what we have for the nav link, paste it in. But remember, we said that this was to match what was in the app.js, so that should be about the app. And this thing in here can say whatever we really want to say. So we can have a message about the app. So this is the nav link. So what happens? Well, a person sees about the app, and when they click on it, it goes, oh, I need to find something called about the app. So it looks in the app.js, and the app.js says, oh, if it's / about the app, I want to load the component called about the app. And if I look at about the app, then this is the component that we created with the card and the text, etc. So if we have kept our server running in our terminal, we'll see in here that it's compiling. If you get any errors, it's going to tell you that you have errors. So module not found error, you attempted to import ... which falls outside the project directory. But when we look inside our browser, we will also see that we have an error. So look at the errors and go, okay, in the SRC about the app, it's saying you are attempting to import ... appcs. So there's something wrong here, and we have to be careful when we are using the imports, because we did say we could create our own folder structure. And what is happening is, if you don't do things properly, as you see here, you're saying I want to go up 2 levels ... up a level ... and find appcs. But appcs is actually in the same folder as the about app, and you can see that from our layout. Our layout had dot, so it's in the same level. So be careful when you come to do these things, and if you change things, as we will do later on, to put things into another folder, you're going to have to change the structure here so that it knows where to get the stuff. So if I just simply change that to dot, and we look in our terminal, you can see that it has compiled properly. So we need to make sure that when we look in the shell or the command line, in this case the terminal, we aren't getting any errors, but we normally will also see that within the browser. So now once again we can see that we had the messages, which is what we had before, and now we have the about the app. And when I click on the about the app, it goes and finds a component called about the app and displays what we want. So you can see this is all the stuff that we put into, and obviously you can scroll up and down, but you can see the information that we want. The only problem is that we haven't got the image. So when we look at the browser, we can see that we don't have an image. We have about the app, which is what we put into our code. So we have in our code about the app. But I will replace that with the code for the image. So src ... images, because now we need to create the images folder. Now when we create the images folder, we want to create the folder inside public. So we're going to right click on public and go to new folder, and we're going to call it images. So just images, it's a folder. And now we need to put in the file called bookinventory.png. So bookinventory.png, we need to put it into that exact place. So I shall paste in an image. And now when we look at our about the app.js, we can see that that's the name of the file over here, bookinventory.png. If I go into my terminal, everything looks okay. And if we go into my browser, you can see now that you have your file at the bottom. So we have this inside the footer. So all well and good. We have the 2 messages, and we have the about the app, and now we'll start creating real ones that link to the back end. But we've got the concept of a single page application with the React router. And if you look at the React router and you click on messages here, you can see that up here it says / messages. And we look in our code and we look in the layout. If we have the / messages, that's what we're seeing here. So when we see messages, it's really saying, oh, that's / messages. And the app.js says, well, if it's / messages, display the messages component, which is what we're seeing. And if we click on about the app, this says about the app, which is exactly what you asked it to do in the layout. So you said on about the app, it's about the app, which goes to the app.js and goes about the app means I want to display the about the app component, and the about the app component is in the same directory and it's called about the app. And if I look in about the app, we have exported it as about the app. So we're doing very, very well. We've got the basics of what we need, and now we just need to start connecting to the back end. We will now start creating the components for our CRUD, create, read, update and delete. So first of all, we'll start off with the read, and we're going to create a component which is called list all products. So that will be listallproducts.js. And what it will do is it will use the fetch API to fetch data from our Spring Boot application, where we have created an in-memory H2 database. Within the fetch API, we use the fetch method, which takes one mandatory argument, that is the path or of the resource we want to fetch. And the fetch method returns a promise. That is, it becomes a response whenever we make a request. So we make a request, we wait, and then we get a response. Once we get the response back in JSON format, we will set it to be part of an array which we will create. Once it's an array, we will then use the map facility to iterate the array and display each of the individual items, or the products really, which are in our table. We could also use, instead of fetch, we could also use Axios. If we look at the code, we will create the listallproducts.js. So we will use import React, and we'll also use useState and useEffect from React. And useEffect is a way in which we can fetch all the items from our API when the component mounts. We'll also use Bootstrap, the container, the row and the card. And we're going to call this function, or this const, list all products. So the first thing we do in it, we set up a products constant, which is an array. And we use state, and that means that we can use the set products to set the products array. So we have a setter essentially, and we're saying the products is an array. We then set up a const for the base URL, so we are going to use http://localhost 8080, which is where our server is running. And if we look back into our backend code, then we can see that what we had was, we said we were going to be using it on localhost 8080. So our server will start on localhost 8080. After we have done that, we will use the useEffect to go and fetch the data from the base URL, which is 8080. But we also have the /API/products, which again, when we look at the back end, we said that that would be the mapping for this class. So what that does with the localhost 8080, this part, what that does is it brings us to the product controller. And then inside the product controller, we have different mappings to do different things. So we're simply saying go and find the products here, and when you get the response back, what we want to do then is we want to put that information into the products array. So we use the set products, the setter, and whatever the data came back, we push it into the array. Then we return, so we want this to be rendered, and we use Bootstrap really to use a container, a row and a card. And then inside the body, we're going to have a table, and the table has just got table row, table columns with name, description, price and stock. Then we have inside the body as well the mapping. And the mapping says, take the products and I want you to map each one of them and display the product.name, the product.description, the product.price, and the product.stock. So if we look back to our back end and we look at our product, we saw that we created these fields. We created the name, the description, the price, and we created the stock. And now what we're saying is we want those to be displayed. We put those inside curly open and close brace because they are variables essentially. So it's products, which was the name of our array. We go back, we can see that products was the name of our array. And what we have got back is the array of data, and each one is a JSON object. So we do product.id. When we're rendering a list, we should have a key, and in this case we set the key to be the ID of the product. So we're saying go to the products and take each one, and we've called each one product, but you could change that name. And we've said give me the product ID, the product name, the product description, and the product price, and give me the product stock level. After all of that, then we export that as list all products. So we will code all of that. We go back to Visual Studio Code. So we right click on the source, go to new file, and we call it list all products.js. Again, we're getting used to this idea that it's just a JavaScript file, and then we put our code in. So our code is exported as list all products. So now what do? Well, we do what we did before. We said that once you create a component, you need to go to the app.js, and you can see that in the app.js we import. So we import, and it was called list all products from double quotes and then list all products. So you can see same format as before, same thing as we said the last time. It's grayed out because we haven't used it, but we add in another root. So we copy the one we have, paste it, and then we can change this to say list all products. And then this should say list all products, the same as this up here. So what we're saying is if the mapping is / list all products, we want to display the list all products. And then we have to go to the layout.js, and we put in another navigation. So we can just copy the one we have previously. They're all the same format, and we have to do list all products, and then we can do whatever name we want in here. We'll just do the same, list all products. Now, we must make sure that the back-end server is running. So, in my case, I have made sure that the server was running, and we see that the server was running on port 8080. So the back-end is running. We now go back into our code here, and we can see that we are going to connect through this one to the back end. And it's going to look for this and return all the data. So if I look in the terminal is saying everything seems okay. So if we go to our browser again, so I'm getting an error here, and if I go back into my code, I'll see the error was here where I have a typo, so that should be, let me take that part there, and it's now correct. So I'm missing out my angle bracket. Interestingly, that in the terminal it wasn't saying anything, but when we tried to display it, it wouldn't display. So here we have our messages. Here we have our About app, which we saw earlier on. And now we have List All Products. And you can see that we have gone to the back end and got all of our products. So if we go back to the back end and we looked into the data.SQL, you can see that that was the data that we put in. So we have now been able to connect to the back end using the fetch, and it fetches all of our data. We will now create our second component of the CRUD operations, the delete. So we will create a component which will delete. Well, we already have the list all products, and we'll put our code inside it. So what we will do is we will create a function or a const called delete product, which takes in an ID. It will then use the fetch API to find /API/products/ID where the method is a delete, and that is in the Spring application, our back end. And if we look at our code for the product controller, we will see that we have a delete mapping which takes in an ID. And when it takes in the ID, it then uses the delete product and passes it the ID. So it uses the method delete product from the product service implementation, which we saw when we created the back end. Now what we also have in our code already is the table, which is displaying the data. But I'll need to put a button in, and the button will have an on click which says I want to delete a product using the product ID. And remember, we created the key, and the key was product ID. So product ID, and we use the delete product. So if I go back, we see that our function here is delete product, and this button is simply saying when I click this button I want to delete the product. So we will add our code into our list all products, and we will put it in after the use effect before the return. So the delete product, it says at the moment, isn't being used, which is quite right, because we said that we will need to go down and inside our table we want to put another TD. So we're going to have another heading, and the heading is going to have the on click, and it's going to have the delete. So we will want to be able to click on the button, but when we click, or when we look here, we have got the button and it is in red. So if we go up to the top, we will need to make sure that what we have in here is where we import as well, comma, button, because that is a part of the React Bootstrap. So if we scroll back down again now, we'll see that the button is fine. So the button is outlined, so it's danger, that means red, so it's going to be a red outline, and the button's going to say the word delete, and when we click on it, it's going to find the delete product, which is the function up here, the delete product, and it takes in the ID and deletes. So So if we go back into our browser, you can see that we now have got our products and we've got a delete button. So pick any one. So I have to pick test-driven development and I click on delete, and test-driven development has gone. So to pick any one at all, so target C#, click, and it has gone. So that's all within the list all products. If we do about the app, still works, the messages still works, list all products. It's now only displaying the ones which are in the database because we have deleted out. If we restart the server, we'll get them all back again. So that is the delete working fully for us. And the important thing to remember when we come to do our code is that we're connecting to the back end, and we're connecting to a mapping in the back end, and the mapping in the back end is a delete, and it has got this as its mapping, and it takes in an ID. Now we will create the third component of our CRUD, create, read, update and delete. This time we will use the create. So we will build a component which will use the fetch to post the data to the back end, and it will post it into the H2 database. Again, we use the fetch method exactly as before. The fetch method can have options as a second parameter. We said earlier about the first parameter being the URL, but the second parameter in our code could also be telling it about the method and the header and the body. So we can use this in this example just to show that we can have a second parameter if we want as well. So to add a product, we will need to have an input form. So we need another form which we will create, and we'll call it product form, and we'll do that after this. So it will be productform.js and it will be exported as product form. But later on we will use the same form to allow us to edit an existing product. So this will mean that we can introduce the concept of conditional rendering, where we show the product form in one of two formats, either for adding a new product or for editing an existing product. So it would look similar to this then. So what we can do is we can have an edit and a delete, and we can have an add product at the bottom, and here we will see that the banner is green. And if we click on the edit, we will see that the banner changes to red. But we still have the same form, but the form will have data populated inside it. And that allows us then to use the same form for one of two reasons. So the code then will still be within the list of all products.js file. And we just add it again, just under the use effect. Doesn't really matter where it goes as long as it goes before the return. So what this is doing is using the same thing. It's a const add product. It takes in a product. And remember what a product was when we designed our model. It had all the information about the ID, the name, the description, the price and the stock. That's a product. So it's going to take in the whole product, and it's going to look for the /API/products mapping in the back end where there is a method of post. And it's going to take your JSON data and stringify it. So it's going to post it into the back end, into the database. And then it uses the ... for the products. So we're going to set the products to be whatever the products is now, spread out, and we add the new product. So we were going to add the new product. So spread the products array and add the new product to it. So we're going to add another container, and this container is going to be the container which has in its body the product form, and we use the add product method. So injecting the product form into this list all products. So let us now go and add this code into the list all products. So as we saw, we had the use effect and then we had the delete. We can add this new function below or above. I'll just add it above, and it's going to be called add product, as we saw. Again, when we put it in, we can see that it's saying you're not using that at the moment, but we know that what we want to do is we want to go down and add another container after this existing container, and it's in this container that we are calling that method. So we're going to call the method add product, so we can go back up and we can see add product's happy now. But what's not happening is we don't have the product form, and that's what we're going to create next. Now we will create our product form.js. That is our product form component. So we'll create a new JS file. So we'll right click on the source folder and then create the product form.js. Similar to the others before, we import React, we import Bootstrap CSS, we import the form, button, row and column from Bootstrap, and then we create our function. Our function will take in add a product. So we're going to be passed add product. We set up an initial form state, a constant, a variable, a constant called initial form state. It has an ID of null, name up blank, description blank, price blank, stock blank. That's the initial form state. We then create another constant called product, and when we want to set the product, then we use the set product, the setter. So when we want to change it, then what we will do is use a set product. The use state initial form state says the initial state of product is whatever the initial form state is. In other words, everything will be empty. The use effect, we don't have anything inside it. Then we'll have a method which will handle the submit. So when we do a submit, it'll check and see if the product name is blank or the product description or the product price or the product stock is blank, and if so, just returns, does nothing. Otherwise, it calls a method add product and passes in the product, and then it sets the product to the initial form state. So once we add a product, it goes back to the form to having a blank. We also have a handle change, which means that every time we make some change, it will set the product to have that new value. We render then in the return a form, and we also have then the row, and we have a number of other things like the form group, and it's basically saying enter the product name, and then it's asking us for the product description, and then it's asking us for the product price. So these are just labels and text boxes where we enter in the data. And the last one we have is the stock. So really a form which is like a HTML form, but it's a React form, and it has got labels, and we put in values, and the values will then be whatever we type in. The button at the bottom then is a submit button, and the submit button then, as we see, the form uses the handle submit. So when we click on the button, it goes to the handle submit, which we had here, and it checks if the things are blank and returns nothing if they're blank. If they're all filled in, it will then add the product. So we will add our code for the product form. We right click on our source folder, new file, and we call it product form. .js and press enter. So we have our product form.js, and now we'll add the code to it. And you can see you have a default product form export, And we can see that we have a function which takes in an add product, and then does what we have already explained. So let's have a look. And we can see that product form is not defined. So when we have list all products, we can see that what we have to keep remembering all the time is that when we have product form, we have called it, but we haven't actually imported it or used it up here. So we need to import the product form. So we will do import product form from double quotes, full stop, forward slash, and then we'll see product form. And we put a semicolon at the end, and now if we look down, product form is happy. So we have to be very, very careful when we do these things, that we make sure that we have always imported what we need. But the point we're trying to make here is, if you don't, you will get an error, and the error will be in your browser, and the browser generally tries to tell you what is wrong. So we can see again, messages, about the app, list all products, but we can see now that we have a form at the bottom, and we can see we have a add product. So let's add in a product, and we'll do test product, test description, product price, let's say 100 point not not, and let's say our quantity is 200, and we click on add product, and we can see that it has been added, and it will be added in the back end. Somewhere we have an extra little piece of code. So going back, if I look in our list all products, you can see that I have the extra round bracket here. We'll take that out, go back to our code, and we can see that that has been removed. So now we have the ability to delete that product if we want. So we delete, and then we can put in again. So test product, and then test description, and then price, whatever we want, 100 point not not, and 200, whatever. And we can add. So we've now got the read, because it reads the data. We've also got the create, and we've also got the delete. So we now will do an update. But notice the way that the form has gone to the initial state of being blank after we add the product to the database. Now, just checking one last thing, if we went back to our localhost 8080 and looked in the database, we set up the database, remember, a stock control in memory, and we connect, and we look at the products and do a select star from products, and do run, we can see that we put in test description 100, 200. Come back to the products again. If we go and add another product, and we'll just call it test on its own, and description test, and price 1, and quantity 1, and add, and we go back to our database, and we will do a run again. To refresh it, we can see that we have ID 13. If we go and delete that and go back into the database and do run again, we can see that it has been deleted. If we add one more product, and we did A, B, C, and description A, B, C, and we do the price 1 and quantity 1, and we add, go back into here and run, we can see that it's not 13 but it's 14. We can see that as it deletes it, it constantly updates the ID. Okay. So come back into here, we can delete out the test product and delete out the ABC. Now we will add the fourth component of our CRUD, create, read, update and delete. We will now create the update. This will be more complicated than the others, so we'll take it nice and slowly and do one part at a time. So within our list all products, we will need to set up some variable or constant that says, are we editing or not? So we're going to set up something called editing, and we're going to be able to change it by using the set editing, and we're setting its initial state to be false. We're then going to set up an initial form state similar to we had in previous example. So we'll have null for the ID, and the name, description, price and stock will be blank. We will also have a current product variable, and to change that we will use the set current product. So that's a function that will change the current product, and initially we'll set its state to be the initial form state. So we will go into the list all products, and we can see that we already have a const for the products and set products, so we're just going to put our new pieces in below that. Again, we can see that we have the editing and the current product saying you haven't used those yet. So we're just setting up these variables or constants here, and then we will use them within our code. We now need to have a function, and the function is going to be used for updating our information. It's going to take in an ID, and it's going to take in the updated product. So we are then going to, when we're in the update, we're going to set the editing to false, and we're going to then use the fetch again, the fetch API, and we're going to look for the /API, /products, and then the ID that we pass in, and we're going to use the put. So we're going to look in the Spring backend for the put, where we're going to update the data. And if we look into our backend code, we will see that we have a put mapping, and the put mapping took in the ID and the product. So we're going to pass the new product and give it its ID so that we can update that particular product. So that's what this method is doing here. It is basically saying we want to put in this new data into the database in the back. So we'll add those details to our code. We can add after the delete or wherever, but before the return. So once again, we haven't used the update yet. Yeah, the update function. And we have to use these things as well. We see the warnings really coming. We will now amend the code so that the product form can also be used to update or edit an existing product which we select from the list above, which has been mapped out. The code will involve the use of conditional rendering, one or the other in our case, so we will use a ternary statement. If the application state is in editing mode, the update facility will be used, otherwise the create facility will be used. And in the update mode, the form will hold the details for the selected product, and these can be amended. Whereas in the create mode, the form fields will have the initial state. That means they will be blank. And then we can add our own details as we did before. So we will need to change what we already have in our code so that within the bottom container, we have this idea of a ternary expression. So we're saying if we're in editing mode, you can see the question mark, that's the ternary. So we're saying that we want to display a card with a header and a body. And then we want to display the product form. So if we're in editing mode, we want to display the product form, and we're actually saying in here that we want the current product. So we want the current product. So we're saying to the product form, here's some parameters that I'm passing in, like editing, set editing, the current product, and update product, and it will display then the current product. If we're not in editing mode, then it's simply saying that I want to display the product form and we want to add a product. So we were saying we want to add a product, whereas in the other one we're saying we want to update a product. So we'll be using the update. So we can go back into our code at the container. And this container was really first for an add, but we want to change that. So we now have it where we have a container, and if we're in editing mode, it goes from here to here. If we're not in editing mode, it goes from here to here. And we can see that what we've done as well is that we've changed the background color. So the background color of one is green and the other one is red. So if we're in editing mode, it's red. Otherwise, it's green, because green's for add a new product, red for editing a new product. Now, as well as that, we will need to then have a button which allows us to edit. We did have a delete before, but now what we want to do is we want to also be able to have a button for the edit. So if we list all products, you can see that we had the button here, and that button was for delete. I'll just put this one above it. It could go below it, doesn't really matter. And what we'll see now is that we're saying that we need to be calling a method which is edit row, and then we want to pass in the product, but we'll now need to add this code as another method. And if we're editing a row, we're going to set the editing to true, and we're setting the current product to be whatever the product ID, name, description is. So we will add that code now. So our edit row, and we can scroll down now and we should see. So when we were calling the method edit row, we were getting an error, but now we have that, so there should not be any errors. A couple of more things then. What we want to do is we want to change the use effect. So we're going to say that in the use effect, if we're editing, we'll want to set the product to be the current product. Otherwise, we had nothing in there. So if we go back into our code and make sure we're in the product form, we'll see that the use effect had nothing in it. We said that earlier on, and we are now just going to change that. So that we're saying, if we're editing, then we want to set the current product to the current product. And we are basically saying there's errors here because our add product is the only thing that the product form is taking in. But when we were doing this across in here, we were saying that we were going to pass in more details. We were saying that we were going to pass in some other details, but we haven't actually set that in the product form. We've only got the add product. So we will need to change that. So we will change that to say update product. So it's going to take in update product. It's going to take in editing, whether we're editing or not. It's going to take in set editing. And it's going to take in the last thing, which is the current product. So when we call it, we're passing in these things, and we need to make sure that the product form accepts those. We are also going to add a function for handle cancel, and that will set the product to be its initial state, and then it'll set the editing to false. So within our product form, we'll put in that function. So product form, make sure you're on product form, and then we've got handle change, and then we do handle cancel. Handle cancel, just above the return. But it doesn't matter as long as it's before the return, and we can see that we haven't used it as yet. What we now want to do then is we're going to amend the product form handle submit function so that it uses conditional rendering for editing and creating. So in the handle submit, then what we want to do is say that if they're all empty, then we just don't do anything. And if we're in editing mode, then we want to update the product using the product ID and the product. And we also then can say that if we are not in editing mode, then we want to add the product. So we can make the changes to the product form, and we can see that in the handle submit, we have the add product, and we are going to replace that. So now we're saying, well, it's not just for adding a product, it can be to update the product if we're editing, or if we're not editing, then we are going to add a product. We now need to amend the product form so that it uses conditional rendering to display different buttons. Whether we're editing, we'll get one set. When we're creating, we'll get a different set. So if we look at the code, we will then again use this idea of conditional rendering with the ternary. If we're editing, we want an update product button, and we want a cancel button. That's why we created the cancel function. And if we're not editing, we simply want a button which is to add a product. So we will change our code within our product form so that we have the two buttons rather than the one that we had. So looking back into our product form, we can see that we have a row and we have a button in it. But the button that we have is just for one thing, to add a product. And we said we were going to replace that. So we will replace that with the ternary. If we're in editing mode, put in an update and put in a cancel button. And for the cancel, it will go to the handle cancel. If we are not in editing mode, we want to simply add a product. So if we look at this button and this button, what we're saying is that it's a submit button. So they're both submit buttons, and if we look to our form is saying that on submit, we go to the handle submit method. And if we go to the handle submit method, it's here that we go, if we're editing, then we update the product, else we add the product. Whereas the other method that we have is specifically going to the handle cancel. Great, so we have our four components. We now want to view the application. So just like before, we do our npm start if we stop the server. If we didn't, we just do as before, and we click on the list all products. But this time, we will then click on the edit button. And when we click on the edit button, then the product form should display the details of the product. So the first thing, to bring up the data, click on the edit button, that's number one. Number two, we then will see the edit product form. So that's the form in edit mode. We'll make a change and we click on the update product button, and we should see our product updated. So into our browser, and if we have a look at one of those, we'll click on the Jenkins one and we do edit. We can see that it is changed to red, conditional rendering. Red was this option. We then will change that to Jenkins new. We click on update the product and we can see that it's Jenkins new. And we can see that this has gone back to green because we're not in editing mode. We have changed it back to false. And we have initialized the state of the product. Now, all very, very good, and everything works. A few hiccups along the way, maybe for you, for me as well, to be expected. It's just about trying to sort the problems out. Now that we have our components for the CRUD as we wanted to set them up for the time being, what we want to do is restructure the code. So we'll restructure the project in such a way that we have a components folder inside the SRC so that we can separate out the components that we created. So we will create a components folder inside the SRC and move the layout, list all products, messages, product form, and about the app components to it. That will mean that some of the relative paths have changed, and therefore we will need to go in and change the list all products JS file so that we can have a / component, so / components. Then we will also do the same in the app.js, and then we will do exactly the same in the about the app.js because it has a path to the app CSS. And we need to just be careful with this. This has .. The one before will have .. / components, and in the list all products it'll be .. So let us now look at the source folder and right click, go to new folder and call it components. And then drag our files up. So about the app and the layout of the list all products and the messages and the product form. If we go, we can see in browser window that we have problems, which is what we said, with relative paths. So the first thing we will do then is we will open up the list all products, and we will now make this .. / components and then / product form. We will then do the app.js, which is not inside the components folder. So inside our app.js, we just need .. / components / So we have .. / components / layout. So we can copy that and paste it in front of the others. Make sure I get it right. Now we'll fix up the CSS. So look at the about the app, and we'll see that we have a dot, but we need .. So we change that. Then we also have the layout.js, and we have the .. and we need .. Well, if we look at our code, it's the same as it was before. Messages, about the app, and list all products. But now let's have a look and see at the list all products. Well, that looks fine. We have our product form at the bottom. We have our map list of components. But when we look at the about the app, it has an image at the bottom. The messages doesn't have a component at the bottom. So what we'll try to do is we'll try to make it so that this image goes to the top as a header, and we can put some other text with it, and the part at the bottom of the about app will be replaced with some text, and that will be the same when we come to all of the components. So we're going to create a header, and the header simply has the image, and it's all contained within a container, so some bootstrap essentially, but all it is an image. And then we will create a footer, and the footer will have some text which we can change and amend ourselves, whatever we want to put in, and it's all again inside a container, a bootstrap container. And once we have created the header and the footer, we will want to put the header and the footer into our layout. So we have to import the header and import the footer. And then we're going to amend our code inside the layout.js to have a wee bit more bootstrap. But inside the bootstrap container and the card, we will have our header. So we're essentially injecting our header inside this container. And then at the end, we will be putting in our footer. And the rest of it is really just the nav that we had before. So we're going to amend the layout.js so that it has all of these components. After we've done that, we will then need to go into the about the app and change the image to some sort of text like about the app. So we shall do all of that first. Right clicking on our components, new file, and call it header.js and press enter, and then we put our code for the header, which as we said is just really our image. Then we right click on components and do new file and call it footer.js, and then we put in our code for the footer, and as we said again, that is essentially just a container with some rows and some columns and a few h3s, but we can put whatever we want into the footer. But obviously then what we need to do, as we said, was we wanted to create a different layout so that it includes the header and the footer and a wee bit more bootstrap. So we will go into our layout.js, and at the top we will want to import our header from, and then we have double quotes dot / and then we can see that we have header and a semicolon. And then we could do exactly the same thing for the footer. So I'll just change that to footer, from footer. So that's our two imports which we haven't used yet. And then we will change the layout, as we said, just to pretty things up a little bit. We still have the same navs inside it, but we want to have a bit more bootstrap, and we will have a header and a footer. Now we have the code in. Just make sure that when you have your code, you don't have any errors, because one of the things that we can see is that we have to also import the container, the row and the card from Bootstrap. These are the two components we created. These are from Bootstrap, and we have used those inside the code. So we can see where we have our header, and we can see where we have our footer. The problem is that the about the app still has got the image. So we're going to take out the image code, and we're going to put in a header in its place. And if you go and have a look, messages has the header and the footer. And if we look at about the app, it has got the header and a different footer for itself about the app, and this is our footer. And list all products has got the header and it's got the footer. So in the about app, we simply put, instead of the image, the about the app, because the image is at the top in the header, and it also has the footer, which every one has because it's part of the layout. And everything else should work perfectly well. So add the product, edit the product, etc. should all work exactly as it was before. So when we view the application, as I say, things haven't really changed much. We have just tidied it up a bit, but we'll have to be careful with the relative paths. So we can see our header, our footer, and then the normal layout with the product list in the middle. So adding some functionality for searches, then we will add a new component called product search by name, where we'll be able to search the database by the name. And as we saw when we created the backend, we were ignoring the case, so we can type in small letters, capital letters, etc. So all this is very similar to what we have done, but this time we are going to import Axios from Axios. So Axios is another way of getting data from the backend or pushing data to the backend. So instead of using fetch, we can use Axios. We then have a function, and we are setting up a constant name. So that will be the name that we're looking for. And then we'll have a products by name, which is an array. That will give me a place to store the products that are returned back to me, or the product that is returned back to me. We have a variable called searched, and that will be either true or false. So we'll have searched or we haven't. And we'll have items found, which is true or false as well. We then have a handle search function, and it uses Axios to go to the back end and find localhost 8080/API/products/search by name, and it passes the name into it. And if we look at the back end code that we have, we created this in the back end, it takes in a name and then it uses the find by name function from the product service implementation and returns to us a list of products. When it returns a list of products, that's our response data. We then check the length, and if the length is greater than 0, then we say set search to be true and set the items found to be true. Otherwise, we simply set the searched to be true and set items found to be false. Then we have a container, and inside the container, that's what will be displayed. So we have inside the return the container. And what we're displaying inside this container then is a form really where we ask the person to enter the product name, and whatever they type in will become the value. And every time it changes, we have an on-change event. And when we have the on-change event, we pass it the target value, the new value. And this form has got a handle search on submit. So whenever somebody submits this form, it will run the function called handle search. And we can see that from the button. The button is of type submit. So when the person clicks this thing that says search, it handles the search. And if we look back on our code, we had this method which simply then went off to the back end with the name and got back our data. As well as that, then we have a ternary which says that if items found is true and searched is true, then we put a table out with these headings, and then we map whatever products come back. Remember, products by name was our array, and that was set whenever the information came back from the back end using our Axios call. So the set products by name was using the data from the back end that came back, and the set products by name was really the setter for the products by name, which is the array. So in the mapping, we're using the array and the map function of it, and we're going to iterate through it and print out the product ID, the name, the description, the price, and the stock level for each one. And when we're doing that, we give a key, and we're simply saying that the key will be the product ID. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we get an error. If the search is true and the items not found is false, then we simply say no match is found. And all of this is done within a container of some sort to help us to make the code look better. Now, once we have created the component, we know what we need to do next. We need to go to the app.js and import the product search by name from the components folder. And we need to add in a route. So the route will say if a person puts in /search product by name, then we want to load up the product search by name component. And we also need to go into the layout, and we need to add a nav link or a link in there which matches up with the search product by name and just has the words product search by name. So we right click on the components folder, we do new file, and we call it product search by name. .js, and then we put the code in as described earlier, and then we said that what we need to do is we need to change the app.js. So we change our app.js, and we know we need to import, so import, and it's product search by name from double quotes dot /components /product search by name, and then a semicolon. Getting the grey or a warning, and that's because we know we have to put in the extra route, otherwise we're not using it, and we can call this product search by name. And we change that to be the name up above. That is the name of the component. This name could be anything. And then we're going to use the layout.js, and we just add in another nav. And this has to be exactly the same as we had in the app.js. So it would be product search by name. And this can say whatever we want. In these ones we've used some spaces, but we can, just to save some space, go to product search by name, or whatever else we want to put in here. So we saw in the code we had product search by name, so we'll just keep it like that. And if we look in our browser, we can see now that we have a product search by name. And when I click on product search by name, it brings me up a search text box, and I can put in Java and do search. And I can see that I get 2 because in the name Java appears in 2 different places. And if I said React and search, I get React.js. And our list all products works exactly the same. So our search has got a different thing from the list all products, which had a form. But when we look at our search by name, we still have our footer at the bottom. So refreshing, you can see that if we wanted to view the application, we just did the npm start, but our server was already running. We click, first of all, on the product search by name. We then type in our search data. We then click on the search button, and then we get our matched product. But it could be multiple products, so we can also have multiple products, and they are mapped out using the map function of the array. Now we could do a similar type thing, and we will use the product search by description. So this will be very similar. We'll create a new component, and then we'll set up a variable or constant for the description. And then we have the same idea as before. So we have products by description for the name of the array instead of name. We have a base URL in here, but we don't need to use that. We just use the axis to get this. So search by description. So if I look at the back end also has a mapping for search description. So search description, and then it picks up the description and then does a find by description method using the product service implementation. So if we look back here, we are going to be able to change our code. So we're going to change our code. And when we change the code for this, it goes off, finds the description, brings back our data. It will be an array. We'll find the length of it as before, and then we will set our values as before, whether true or false. And then once again, in this one, we will be able to use some of the code that we had used before, but it's inside this component. We will use a delete, unlike the last one, where when we got the product, then we didn't have any functionality to delete. So if I typed in Java here and search, there was no functionality here to edit or delete. And what we're trying to do in this example then will be, we will want to have a delete option, and that would then go off to the back end and delete the product, or we want to update. This is functionality we've already used, so the code's very much the same. And we'll also want to be able to edit the row. So again, we have a container, and the container is going to include the text box that says search by something, but we'll have a heading at the top, search by product description. And then we have our text box which says enter the product description. Every time we change something, the onChange event is called in. And when we click on the search button at the bottom, then the submit goes to the top and says, oh, you want to handle the description search. If the items are found and it has been searched, then we will create this time 2 extra columns, edit product, delete product, and the same thing when we come to map the things out. We will map out the ID, name, description, price, and stock. But the next column will have a button that says edit, and when it's clicked, it will call the function that we created called edit row. And we'll also have a button for delete, and that is clicked, it will call the delete product. So we will need to code that in the same way as we did before. If nothing is found, then what we have is we simply have the idea of item not found. So if we look at the next part, then it is similar to what we did before, where we have our conditional rendering. We want to put something out which will be the product form. So if we're editing, we want to call the product form and pass these 4 things into it as we did before. So if we're not editing, we simply print out a row. Finally, once we have created our component, we have to go into the app.js, import it, and set up the route. And we go into the layout and we add in a nav link. So we will code that now. So we'll right click on components, new file, and we would say product, search by description. And then we add our code. So product search by description. We then go to app.js and we import product search by description from double quotes, full stop, /components / product search by description. We now need to include a route, and we'll call this product search by description. And we're going to call the product search by description component. And then we go to our layout and we will copy this line, and we want this to say product search by description. And this can be anything we want, it's just words. So product search by description. And if we go back into the browser, we can see that we have an error here. So let's go back and have a look and see why I can't find the description. I've spelled it wrong there for a start, but let's go back here and description. But I notice here that when I created the component, I didn't put the JS at the side. So I right click and go to rename and just add .js at the side. That's why it wasn't coming up earlier on, and we should have noticed that. So you can see now you have the product search by name and the product search by description. If I list all the products, you can see in the descriptions, so if we did, for example, version, or if we looked and we did 2, then we should be able to find. So let's go in and have a look. Ooh. As you can see, when I have clicked on product search by description, something has gone wrong. We're getting there's nothing here, which is interesting because I wasn't expecting that, but it's simply saying that it hasn't found that route. So if we go back into your code, inadvertently we're able to maybe describe what that means. So if we look at our app.js, it's saying here that it gives us that if it can't find this. So if I go back into my layout, you'll see in here I have 2 eyes in there. So those two don't match. A good tip is if you use that name, just double click on it, copy it, and put it into here exactly the same way. So if I go back now and do a product search by description, then we get our box coming up. So we said that list all products, we were going to try version. So we'll try version in here, and we can just type it in small letters and click search. And we can see that we get version coming up. Or if we typed off, no matches are found. And if we find 2 and search, then we get the ones with 2. So great, we have now been able to search by name and search by description. Now the important point, when we search by description, we saw that if we put in 2 and we did a search, we get the multiple products coming up. But what we also see is that we have an edit and a delete. So if we list all our products again, we can see here's our products, and when we do that, we can go to edit. So this is editing the product from just the ordinary list of all products. When we do a search by name and we look for Java, then we don't have a facility here to edit. But if we go to search by description and type Java and search, because we added the functionality here, the same as in the list all products, we can edit and we can delete. So if we look at the JavaScript essentials and go to edit, we have this same product form in edit mode. Let's change the stock quantity to 500 and do an update. If I did edit again and I wanted to cancel, I just cancel, so I've still got the 500. And if I wanted to delete the JavaScript, I just click delete. And if I list all products, I don't see my JavaScript inside. So we added the same functionality, edit and delete, to the list all products as we did in list all products. So we should be beginning to think, well, we've probably duplicated a bit of code here, and we could now think about moving that so that they're components on their own. So our final search will be a product search by stock level. So we're going to create a new component. We will add the component that will allow us to search by the stock level. When we say the stock level, we're saying that it will be greater than or equal to that stock level. So in the back end, we will have to have the function which goes greater than or equal to. We don't have that yet, we'll have to create that, but we can still do this component. So this is going to be very similar to the product search by description. So you could duplicate the file that we've just created, rename it, and then amend the code, or else we can just create a new component and add the code to it. Either way, you'll still end up with the same thing. So we will just create a new file called product search by stock level. And then we will add the code, and you'll see the code is very similar. So we're going to have a const to hold the stock level. We're going to have an array to hold the products that are returned. And then we'll have a search, the items found, initial state, etc. So very, very similar to the last one. The difference being that it will go to a mapping in the back, which is / search stock level, and it will pass in stock level and whatever value we typed. When the response comes back, we again check that there is data. We set the searched to be true and the searched items to be true. Otherwise, we set the search to be true and we set the items found to be false. Same as before. We will also include, as we did in the search by description, a delete functionality, and we're going to delete by the product ID, and we're going to do an update as well, update using the ID. So this is the same code. We'll also have an edit row, and we'll also have then, as before, a title at the top, search by stock level, and we will have inside a form a label which says search products by stock level, and we'll have a text box where we say enter the stock level. Every time that changes, we run the onChange event. When the person clicks on the button, it's a submit button, so it goes to the onSubmit, which says handle the stock level search, goes to the back end and finds greater than or equal to, and we have to create that method yet. It then will display a table as before with our edit and delete words at the top, and then it will do a mapping, and the last two columns will be our edit and delete, same as before. We'll also have a no matches found if the searched is true and the items found is false. Then once again we have this ternary for the conditional rendering. If it's editing, then we will have a call to the product form passing in editing, set editing, the current product and the update. Otherwise we simply say we want a row. Once we do that, same thing applies again. We go and we change our app.js to include the import and set the route. And then we go into the layout and we set our nav link. So we shall do that and add our code. We right click and we go new file and we call it product search by stock level.js. And then we will add the code, and then we go to our app.js and we import, add a route, for product search by stock level. And we want to use the import product search by stock level. And then this is what we will need when we go into the layout. So once again, we can copy this line. And at the end, put in our copy of that, and we will change this to product search by stock level. And this can be product search by stock level or level, whichever we want. These are just the words. We go back, we can now see product search by stock level, and it's going to be a greater than or equal to. So if we did greater than or equal to 8, then we should see the 8 and the 200. So product search by stock level. We enter in 8 and we do a search. But why does it not work? Well, we told you at the start that what we hadn't done is we hadn't created the back end for the mapping. So we now have to create the back end, because when we did it, we created some mappings, search by description or search description, and we also search by name, but we didn't do a search by the stock level, and that's what we will need to do. But again, what we have said is that we just want to refresh what we did on the back end, because that was quite a while ago, and now we just need to do exactly the same thing as we did before. So if we look in the product service implementation, we'll see that what we have in the back end is we have a number of different things like get all products, get product by ID, etc. So we have a number of things in the implementation. So we can see that we have a number of different items in here, which all come about because we are using the product repository. So if we look at the product repository code, we can see that we have find by name, find by description, and now we need to add in find by stock greater than equal, and then we pass in the stock level. Now this is an interface, so we don't put the code for that in here. We will put the code for it in the implementation layer. So we will have to have a find stock greater than or equal to. So when we come in to the product implementation, then we will have something down here. You can put it really anywhere. So I'll put it into the end. We will now put the find by stock level as a method. And this method will call the find by stock greater than equal to, and we pass it in the stock level. And that method is in the product repository. Now we don't really need to do anything. So when we look into the product repository, we didn't need to do anything here. We don't need to add any code to that. Normally we would, because this is just an interface. But the beauty of JPA is that it's going to do all of that work for us and find that, the same as it did when it did the ignore case. We didn't write any code behind that. We just used it in the implementation, said, I want to use that method, and I'll pass you to the description. So here we're going to pass the stock level to that method, and the product repository is going to go off and work with that. But we'll also need then something in the product controller, so that we're going to search by the stock level. And if we go back into our code, when we look at the search by stock level, we can see that what we're saying is we're going to go to a thing which is / search stock level, and we pass in the stock level. So we know what we have to do. We have to create another mapping in here, and we will do that now. So inside our product controller, we can put the code just at the bottom, just above the end of the class, basically. And what we're saying is it's a get mapping, and the map is going to be search stock level. If we go back here, it's going to be / search stock level, and it's going to pass in the stock level. So in here, we're going to request the value of stock level, put it equal to a Java variable called stock level, and pass that stock level to the find by stock level method, which is handled by the product service implementation class. So we will type, or could type into the address bar once we run this, http:// localhost 8080 /API /products, and then / description. And in our case, we will need to stop this server and run it again because we have made amendments to it. So we will now run the code. We will run the server again. And again it starts, so we have no errors in our code. And it's starting on port 8080, which is what we know. Port 8080, well, we knew that because it's the same as before. And if we go back into our browser and we search by the stock level and we put in 8 and search, then this time we are getting all the ones which are greater than 8. And what you notice now is that we have more than we had before because we restarted the server and we got the 10 or whatever products back again. So all the ones we put before were lost because it was an in-memory database and we started it afresh. And if I put in 100 and did a search, we get 100 and 200. So if we list all the products again, you can see there's only going to be 2, which are 100 or more. So that's our search by stock level. So going back to the back end, we start off with our product controller, and the controller saying that we're going to have a mapping, which is / search stock level. That will bring it to this method, which will take the stock value and put it into a Java variable. It will pass the Java variable to the find by stock level method, which is in our product service implementation. So in our product service implementation, we will have the method, and that method takes in whatever the stock value is, and then it uses the find by stock greater than or equal to method, which is in the product repository. And if we look in the product repository is really an interface, and we're saying find by stock greater than equal, which takes in the stock value, and all the work is done behind that for us. Now there's much more we can do, but that is ample for starting off with React, seeing how we build up our CRUD product. So that's a create, read, update and delete to the back end that we had. We've also seen a little bit about how we can use components like the header and the footer to enclose within the layout. We've also seen that the importance of the HTML, index HTML, which had the root. And we also saw what the app.js and the layout did, because that's where we were adding our components. We don't really need to have a layout. I just like to have the layout there just to show you that everything is sitting inside that layout.